let's start. The Israel and Iranian conflict is very confusing to me for the past week, right? Trump came out saying, oh, there's a ceasefire, but none of them said anything. But then later, Iran come out and said, okay, we will stop if Israel stop bombing us, before 4 o'clock, something like that. But then it seems like there was a ceasefire, but then both sides accused the other side, you know, not following through, what have you. So do we have a real ceasefire now? It seems like we do have a ceasefire now, is it? Can you explain the whole thing?
No, I don't think we've got a ceasefire. I think what we have is a situation where neither side is currently attacking the other.
Okay.
But I don't think there's been an agreement to have a ceasefire. And I think that is an important distinction. What I think happened, and by the way, when you say that it's confusing and complicated, I mean, like hell, it's the most complex, in fact, chaotic sequence of events that I have ever seen. A conflict conducted in the most eccentric and bizarre way. But as I said, speaking about what we have at the moment, my understanding is what happened was this: the Americans, the Israelis contacted the Americans, um, informing them, this is about a week ago, that Israel was running out of missiles and needed the conflict to end quickly.
Mhm.
They were pressing the Americans to attack Iran. Trump had said that he would probably decide within 2 weeks whether or not to attack Iran. Israel said, we cannot wait 2 weeks. We
Mhm.
have to do it now because in 2 weeks' time we will be exhausted. It's not just that we're running out of missiles, but our only international airport is closed. Our ports are closed. Our industrial facilities aren't working. So we need this to end fast. So Trump then decided to go ahead and attack Iran because he was under all that pressure. If you then followed his messages that he published on Truth Social over that incredible day, the day after the attack, I mean, he began to get increasingly nervous and frightened. The reports started to appear that the Iranians were going to close the Strait of Hormuz. He said that we need to keep the price of oil low because if it goes higher, that will work to the benefit of the enemy. He used the word enemy, and he was clearly talking about Iran. He then published another post saying, drill, baby, drill. We need to drill and supply ourselves all that oil. He then got Marco Rubio to telephone China. We don't know who he spoke to in China, by the way. The American media has never said much, but apparently they did contact China. And they asked China, can you please ask the Iranians not to close the Gulf of Hormuz? And if you do that, we're not going to try and interfere with your oil exports, your oil imports from Iran. That's another whole story we will come to. And then the news started to come through that the Iranians were about to attack the American bases in the Middle East, but they gave warnings about this to the Americans in advance. So Trump was, incredibly worried that this would escalate and get out of control, and that there would be a forever war. And his base was getting increasingly angry and frustrated with him. And then you saw his sense of relief when, as I said, the attacks from the Iranians against the American bases turned out to be more token than real, which everybody accepts, even Trump himself accepts. So he then announces, as he always does, that there's going to be a ceasefire. And of course, he didn't apparently talk about this either with the Israelis or with the Iranians. The Iranians had always said that if the Israelis stopped attacking them, they would stop attacking Israel.
Mhm.
So Trump told the Israelis to stop. At that point, the Israelis were very unhappy. They didn't like the way it was done at all, because undoubtedly what they were hoping was that if the Americans attacked one time, then the Americans would go on attacking and that would continue the war. That was what their intention was. But anyway, Trump comes along, tells them to stop. The Iranians apparently don't reply. They're in no direct contact with the Americans, but they don't make any kind of message, but they do continue to say if they are not attacked, they will stop attacking Israel. Israel then announces that the Iranians have broken the ceasefire and have launched 2 missiles against them and that they're going to attack Israel. Trump then becomes absolutely furious with Israel and speaks to Netanyahu and apparently swears at him and swears in public as well and tells Netanyahu, pull back your aircraft and stop doing this. And the result is, after all of this, we get into this situation where the Americans aren't attacking Iran, Israel isn't attacking Iran, and as a result, Iran isn't attacking Israel and the United States. But there has been no agreement. I'm fairly confident that I have outlined it correctly, that this is how it all came about. I should say that this is one instance when I'm not just reading Trump's Truth Social posts. Various people have been in contact with me. I don't want to say too much. I have, perhaps for the first time ever, had information from within the administration, which helps to sort of put the pieces together. But this is what happened. I mean, he basically realized that Israel was running out of military equipment, that its economy was about to collapse, and that the Israelis, in desperation, were trying to get the United States involved in an indefinite war with the Strait of Hormuz closed and all of this. And he panicked and he brought the whole thing to a stop.
So you think Marco Rubio's contact somebody in China, the phone call basically are saying, can you ask the Iranian not to close the Strait of Hormuz? In return, you can continue to buy oil from Iran without we sanction you. So basically, that's the phone call was
Well,
about.
that's the spin the Americans are pushing. You know what I think happened? I think Marco Rubio did try and speak to someone in China. I've not seen any report that he managed to speak to Wang Yi, who would be the obvious person. I don't know what message did get through to China in the end. I am sure that China did not contact Tehran. There wouldn't have been the time to anyway. But the Americans, who are now very anxious to keep the Chinese on side with this, they do not want the Straits of Hormuz closed, and they hope to persuade the Chinese also to take steps to prevent the Straits of Hormuz being closed. So Trump announced, again unilaterally, that the United States is going to ease sanctions on Iran to allow Iran to continue to export oil to China. Now, I mean, it's ludicrous because those sanctions have never been enforced anyway. I mean, it's not as if the Chinese or the Iranians have paid any attention to those sanctions. But anyway, he's made that announcement. So again, one mustn't take what the Americans say about these things too seriously. The point is that Trump himself was in a panic that the Iranians were about to close the Strait of Hormuz. And he was even prepared to beg the Chinese to try to help them to get them to keep it open. It's the story I always say, that the Americans, like they do it with the Russians, they want to use China like a tap that they can turn on and off whenever they like.
Yeah. Another confusing part is this massive ordnance penetrator. So supposedly, I mean, first after they did that, it seems all indications are saying that it didn't really cause much of a damage that they anticipated. But then later they said they did. Trump said, they pretty much destroyed all the Iranian nuclear facility, what have you, underground, facility. And then even the Iranian come out and saying, yes, it caused a lot of damage, or, we demand you to give us compensation. Some people are saying this is kind of a theater that they do this in order to give
Yeah.
the US the reason to stop the bombing? Is that what's going on there? Very confusing.
Well, I think there's an element. I think there's an element of this. I think the concern is in Iran and in other places that if it were confirmed and accepted by everybody that these Iranian nuclear facilities have survived the American attack, then Trump would be under immense pressure to resume the bombing.
Mhm.
And for that reason, they don't want to give him reasons to do that because Iran has suffered quite badly from this. I mean, we'll probably talk all about that further. My own senses, and again, I've had some information about this from various people. There's one instance where I've actually been getting quite a lot of information, by the way, is that almost certainly the facilities have not been destroyed. What has probably been badly damaged inside the facilities are the centrifuges, because the centrifuges operate on a continuous motion
Mhm.
system. And if the power is turned off and there's massive vibrations, these are delicate instruments and they can be,
Mhm.
broken and adjusted and things of that kind. But Iran has shown in the past that it has the capacity to mass produce these centrifuges. So there's no reason to think that they can't do this again. So whatever damage has been done to the centrifuges, they can probably replace them. And it does increasingly look as if they managed to remove the highly enriched uranium
Mhm.
from the Fordel, from the facility, and that it is still in their possession, and that they still possess the ability to enrich it further up to the level that would be needed to make a nuclear bomb. So on that basis, this operation failed.
And then one more thing is also, I mean, there's so many confusing things. Is this thing the
Yeah.
Doomsday plane, the E-4B Night Watch that supposedly you only use that for when the US is under massive attack or something? Those planes were in the
Yeah.
Andrews military base, joint base
Yeah.
in Maryland. So that's giving people the impression that this is very serious, that they are even doing that, prepared for the worst or something. Is that also some kind of a put up a show, or do they really serious preparing for something like that?
The extraordinary thing is we don't know, but I'm going to make a guess that it was not for show, because if it was for show, they would have publicized it much more than they did. So my own guess is that in the middle of everything else, that there was quite a lot of panic going on in Washington. As I've discussed many times, I'm a good person to analyze and smell panic, if you like.
Hmm.
Uh, um, I used to have to deal with people who were in a state of panic many times in my career. So I understand panic well, and I can see the signs of it. There was an awful lot of panic here. I mean, they didn't know what was going to happen. They weren't sure how Iran was going to react. They weren't sure how other countries might react. And, they were doing all of these things because they were scared. If you read Trump's social media posts with an eye to looking for panic, it is all over it. It is all over his Truth Social posts, and especially on that one particular day, he was getting more and more frightened.
Well, that seems very reckless if they don't seem have a good assessment of what Iran is going to do or other countries going to do. But yet they did that. I mean, they just bombed Iran and without knowing too much. Isn't that very, very reckless? Extremely, utterly
I mean, to
irresponsible.
say that it is reckless, utterly irresponsible. These words that you use are correct, but they are not strong enough. There is no word sufficiently strong to describe how terrible this whole thing was. I mean, these people absolutely did not know what they were doing. I mean, they launched themselves on something over which they had no control. You don't get any sense that there's any wider discussion within the administration as to what they would do. There was apparently a lot of rows and a lot of anger and a lot of shouting and all of that, but there was no considered proper decision making process, no real idea for an exit plan,
Mhm.
no real objective, clear objective defined. I mean, it was unbelievable. And I am sure that you have seen, and I'm sure that the people of China have seen, that utterly, I mean, it's shameful,
Mhm.
incredibly alarming interview of Tucker Carlson's with the American Senator Ted Cruz, in which
Yeah.
he's advocating an attack on Iran, and he doesn't know the size of the country, the makeup of its population, the size of that population, basic facts about it, and against a country against which he knows nothing, he's insisting that the United States go to war.
And yet, when Tucker Carlson pointed it out, he didn't seem like alarmed by it. He seems like that's not a big deal. So if I don't know the population, what's the big deal? We can still, bomb it, attack it, or something. He didn't see the problem. You see, that's the incredible part
No,
of
he
it.
didn't see the problem. He was furious with Tucker Carlson. He was so angry with Tucker Carlson, not
Yeah.
not acknowledged in any way that you should actually take the trouble to learn something about the country you're intending to attack. I mean, it's just unbelievable, actually.
Yeah.
But the whole affair exposes the utterly chaotic nature of the decision making process in Washington. You can't even talk about a decision making process in Washington anymore.
Mhm.
I I think people in China, perhaps more than anywhere else, need to understand this. You are not talking about a government anymore. I mean, this isn't how any government works. It's certainly not how the Chinese government works. You're talking about a random selection of people, some of whom don't even have government positions. I understand that Mark Levin,
Yeah.
who is a Fox News host, was coming in and out of the White House and talking to Trump. I've heard that Laura Loomer was, and she's what, 20? I mean, I don't know what
Mhm.
age she is. She was doing the same. I mean, there is no proper structured government of the United States in existence at the moment. There are people who hold important offices. There's still a Secretary of State. There's still a Defense Secretary. There is no national security advisor. I mean, Rubio is supposed to be
Mhm.
shadowing that for that job, but how can he be?
Mhm.
But I mean, and by the way, I mean, this is just an extreme version of it with this administration. But I don't think it's that better
Mhm.
with other administrations. I mean, we've just had another administration where we now know that the president was basically senile
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
wasn't able to fulfill his functions.
Mhm.
So we don't have a functioning government in Washington anymore. And that makes it incredibly difficult to predict the kind of decisions it's going to make. I just imagine. I mean, in China, I mean, the Politburo, the Standing Committee of the Politburo. You have the State Council. You have all of
Mhm.
these various bodies. It's there is a structured system through which these decisions are made. They're not made in this crazy way from one day to the next, with the president communicating his thoughts to the world, on his social media platform, which he himself owns, by the way, just to
Mhm.
make it even more bizarre.
What's good? I mean, I know it's very hard to predict, but what's going to happen next? Because I don't think Israel will give up, even though they are clearly they know that Iran is not as easy target as they think it is. But I don't think Israel will stop. And then also from Iranian side, I saw your conversation with Glenn Deason and Mearsheimer. So you guys are saying, Mearsheimer was saying that, from Iranians' perspective, they probably are much safer if they have nuclear bomb. Because look at this North Korea, right? So
Mm.
nobody dare to bomb North Korea. So from their perspective, even though, they say they don't want to, but just from a purely practical viewpoint, it's probably safer for them to acquire one. So what do you think going to happen next?
Well, I think that is now a very, very real possibility. I
Mm,
think we are much closer to a nuclear bomb in Iran than we were 3 weeks ago. I
mm,
mean, all the indications 3 weeks ago were that the Iranians were negotiating in good faith to
mhm,
come to an agreement to place limits on their nuclear enrichment program, and that they were not working towards acquiring a nuclear bomb. I mean, this is something we haven't discussed. I think we discussed it last week, that this attack was launched even as negotiations were underway, negotiations being conducted by Iran in good faith, with the United States also saying that the negotiations were making progress, and with Russia also participating
mhm,
as an active third party in the negotiations. So, the Iranians have now been shown that they can't have any confidence in American negotiators. They've also, and this is disastrous, been shown that they can have no confidence in the International Atomic Energy Agency,
mm,
which not only provided an entirely phony pretext to justify this attack, but the Iranians believe has been leaking information about Iran's facilities, confidential information about its facilities to Israel and the United States, including the identities and whereabouts of some of the scientists who were
mm,
involved in the program, who were as a result assassinated.
mhm,
And we also have seen open threats being made to assassinate the spiritual and political leader of Iran.
mm,
So, when the Iranians see all of this, they're going to say to themselves, obviously, we have got to acquire nuclear weapons because these people are faithless. We can't negotiate with them. And they are crazy. They want to destroy us. Now, I don't want to see Iran acquire nuclear weapons. I want to make that absolutely clear. I think it would be a very dangerous thing. It would be the beginning of the end of the whole nuclear non-proliferation treaty and everything that it stands for. I don't think China wants to see that
mhm.
happen. I been discussing in several programs that there was a key meeting in Qingdao
Yeah.
of defense, yes, of the defense
Mm,
ministers of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I'm sure that was a meeting that was scheduled a long, long time ago. I don't think it was set
mhm,
up um, in connection with these events, but it was timely that it was taking place there. I think the Chinese defense minister chaired the meeting. The Iranian defense minister attended. I think the Chinese definitely, and the Russians also, will have told the Iranian defense minister, look, we understand your concerns. We understand all that has happened. But we still don't want Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. What can we do to help Iran
mhm,
within reason that would dissuade you from doing that? And I suspect that those discussions were taking place. It's not that the Chinese and the Russians want to become involved in a conflict like this. It's that, as I said, they probably understand, as the Americans and the Israelis apparently don't, that the Iranians now have every incentive to move forward with a nuclear weapons
mhm,
program.
mhm. Yeah, I mean that's what the Chinese netizens discussions is about, right? They have talked about this for a while. Like if the United States accusing any country to have a weapon of mass destruction, you better have it. So you're safer to have it than not to have it. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, North Korea. By the way, China
Mhm,
did everything it could to dissuade North Korea from going nuclear. There were negotiations. And again, the Americans acted with incredible bad faith. They even came to an agreement with North Korea in the
mhm,
1990s that if
mhm,
North Korea abandoned its nuclear weapons program, the United States would provide North Korea with civilian nuclear reactors and would lift sanctions.
Mm-hmm.
And the North Koreans agreed, and they destroyed all of the facilities that they had built, which might have led to them acquiring nuclear weapons. And as soon as that happened, the Americans went back on what they had agreed and started talking openly about regime change. And that was what led North Korea, against China's earnest desires to go nuclear. And it could very well turn out to be the same with Iran. And bear in mind that Iran and North Korea are close friends.
Yeah. Yeah, every time, yeah, it's not like there is no sound voices within the United States. There are attempts trying to get some deal, but then there's always stronger forces destroy it. But they always do that, sabotage it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Lawrence Wilkinson, Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence Wilkinson, who was Colin Powell's chief of staff, and a sane and very good man, and who's participated in many of these discussions under George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush and Obama and all of these people. He's been involved in the American government. He says the other thing that you just cannot comprehend is how rude and aggressive these people who demand war are. How they shout, how they stamp the floor, how they swear. He says anybody who is not exposed to this cannot understand how crazy these people are and how difficult they are to control if you ever encounter them.
Yeah, regarding this Shanghai cooperation organization foreign minister meeting, it's not much reported in the Western media, right?
No.
So you think that they have
It's not reported at all. I can tell you that straight. I found one report of it. One.
Yeah. Yeah. So I also feel like it's kind of timely, even though it is scheduled way ahead. So you think they were mainly, I mean, there is no joint statement because apparently India is not happy that there was no language mentioned there about the terrorist attack, basically trying to criticize Pakistan. So there was no joint statement. But I guess
No.
I want to hear what you think. Mainly the discussion was about, I guess, about the situation in the Middle East, among others. Is that your take?
Yeah, I'm sure they discussed many things, but I've no doubt at all that it was mostly about the situation in the Middle East. And I get to say something. I think that because the discussion was mostly about the Middle East, there would have been no great desire anyway by anybody to publish a final statement, because they wouldn't want to disclose too much of what they'd been saying to each other in this very, very fraught time. But I've no doubt that was mostly what they discussed, and that was the far and away the biggest priority. We are talking about a war, after all. If we're talking about India and Pakistan, I think, again, the Chinese and the Russians, and we know that the Russians had a long meeting with the Indians at this meeting, by the way. TASS has published a report. The Chinese and the Russians will have been working very, very hard to get the Pakistanis and the Indians talking to each other. So I think that was perhaps part of what was taking place. But as I said, mostly it would have been about the Middle East, because that's the dangerous one now.
Mm-hmm. And then in the meantime, as this meeting was going on, the NATO also had a summit in Hague, right? There are quite a few things happening there. First of all, Trump didn't seem fully committed to this Article 5, right? So, which is interesting. What is your take on that?
Well, this is it's very interesting because we've discussed what was undoubtedly a substantive meeting that happened in China of defense ministers, which was very, very quiet, but where we can be sure that very, very serious matters were discussed. And then we contrast that with the NATO meeting, where it's all over the television, huge amounts of bizarre and extraordinary statements, and absolutely hardly any discussion about anything at all. I mean, that meeting was pure and complete theatre. And it all revolved around Donald Trump. So Donald Trump comes along. He's flying into The Hague with his entourage on Air Force One. The media are there. He says, well, Article 5. Well, it's up to you. You can interpret it in all sorts of ways. Who knows quite what it means? It might mean one thing to one in one situation, it might mean something completely different in another situation. I mean, he does this all the time. He's always talking and thinking aloud in ways that alarm and frighten everybody. He then turns up at The Hague. He's surrounded by a sycophancy of a kind that, well, I mean, it's just embarrassing. I mean, bear in mind, we're talking about the leaders of what were, within my own lifetime, great European nations. I mean, Britain used to be. I mean, I overlapped the first 4 years of my life. Winston Churchill was still alive. I remember General de Gaulle, who used to lead France. I remember Konrad Adenauer and Willy Brandt and Helmut Schmidt, who used to lead Germany. And all of these people, fawn and bow before Donald Trump. I mean, it's revolting, actually. I mean, it was awful. And they tell him that they're going to increase defense spending to 5% by 2035. None of them has the slightest intention of ever doing that because they know it is impossible. The Russians have ridiculed it. They say, you're talking about the imminent threat you face from us, but you're going to raise your defense spending to 5% by 2035? What are we supposed to be doing over these 10 years? Are we supposed to be sitting on our hands? Or maybe the reality is you don't really think that we're going to attack you at all. The Russian media are having a field day with all of this, by the way. Mm-hmm. So a completely empty, vacuous summit meeting. If this meeting, this NATO meeting, was intended to prove how strong NATO is, it did exactly the opposite. It showed how weak it is. There were no policy decisions. There were no plans. There was no real attempt to address the issues of Ukraine. There was no serious discussion about the situation in the Middle East. There was nothing. It was embarrassing.
Well, is that why, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand are being called the Indo-Pacific Four or the IP4, and they normally are they are invited always to the NATO meeting, but this time only New Zealand went. The other countries, Japan, Korea, Australia, they didn't show up. I guess that's the reason. Now we know why they don't want to show up.
Well, that's exactly the reason why they didn't show up. Because I mean, what would have been the point of going? It's nonetheless a very, very interesting that they decided not to go. I mean, they weren't going to even go through the show of pretending unity, and that suggests that there's growing divisions and some suggestions increasingly now that in Japan especially, sentiments are changing, and with the new president in South Korea, perhaps sentiments are changing in South Korea also. But I'm increasingly getting the sense that the Asian countries are just looking at this mess and they say, let's keep well away. We don't want to be involved in any part of what the Americans are doing or in any part of what the Europeans are doing. These people are out of their senses.
Yeah. Now, regarding this 5% GDP commitment, so I also get the sense they don't really want to commit 5% of their GDP. Now, in that case, why don't they just, the best way to not to spend so much money on military is to try to get peace, right? So if they don't want to spend the money, why don't they, get a peace deal, have a good relationship with Russia? That will save them the money that they need to spend, right?
You're again being completely Chinese. That is a rational question. It's not just a rational question, it's the rational answer to the current crisis. We are going through a major budgetary crisis in Europe. the British government, by the way, the Prime Minister is looking like he might fall because the Parliament, the Labour, the Labour Party, his party, is rejecting key planks of his economic programme. There are similar problems now starting to appear in Germany as well. You would have thought that in the middle of a budgetary crisis and at a time of economic stress, the last thing governments ought to be doing is talking about spending vast amounts of money that Europe doesn't have on unaffordable weapons it's never going to use. And absolutely, why not actually conduct negotiations with the Russians? Just a few weeks ago, it was being suggested that I remember it happened. I mean, Sanchez, who's the only leader of a major European power who's retained any degree of self rationality, he said, look, it's time we actually started speaking to the Russians. Let's appoint a high representative. And he's the only one who came out at this NATO summit and said, why are we talking about 5% of GDP defense spending? We all know it can't be afforded. Anyway, when he suggested that they appoint an EU representative to contact the Russians, there was a row. Kaja Kallas, who's the EU foreign minister, if you want to call her that, insisted that it should be her. Everybody agreed that was ridiculous, given the opinions of Russia that she's known to have. Emmanuel Macron then proposed himself. Everybody, of course, agreed. And what has he done? What has he done since? I mean, this is about 3 months ago. Has he contacted the Russians? Has he spoken to Putin? Has he traveled to Moscow? Has he gone to China to discuss the situation in Europe, which might be a good idea, and suggested a meeting between, say, a French representative to look at this problem and the Chinese peace envoy? No, they've done absolutely nothing. Instead of making any serious attempt to try to move towards any kind of solution or dialogue with the Russians, they continue to talk about the Russian threat, and they continue to make fantasy promises to Trump to keep him happy about spending 5% of GDP on defense, promises which they don't intend to keep. Again, it's shameful. Chinese people perhaps also ought to be aware how deeply humiliating for many people in Europe this is, that we have a leadership class that behaves in this way.
Yeah. Now, I got a feeling it seems like everybody wants the United States to get into wars with somebody, because I think the Europeans very much prefer the US to fight the Russians directly. So they don't, right? I think that's what they want. And of course, the Israelis want the US get involved to fight the Iranians. And then it's well known in China that Japan would prefer the US to fight China. You know, if the US and China get to in fight, that Japan would be the beneficiary. So you see, everywhere people want they want US to get involved somehow. Don't you think?
That's exactly correct. Everybody does, because everybody knows that by themselves they can't win any of these wars. Israel cannot defeat Iran. I mean, that became absolutely clear. The only way Israel can defeat Iran is by doing what Mearsheimer said in that program that you watched: use nuclear weapons against Iran. That's the only way that Israel can defeat Iran. That became absolutely clear during this 12-day war. The Iranian missiles were getting through and were doing an increasing amount of damage to Israel. Europe cannot fight Russia. I mean, the Ukrainian conflict has made that absolutely clear. I again, just to get a sense of how utterly surreal the situation is, the British are arguing with each other about the fact that the Prime Minister wants to buy 12 F-35A fighter jets from the United States. And this is supposed to lead to a massive increase in the Royal Air Force's capability. The Russians add about 12 fighter jets to their air force every month. I'm not even talking about what China is doing, which I'm sure is, multiples of that figure. So they can't fight the Russians, and Japan cannot fight China. I mean, they couldn't defeat China in the 1930s and 1940s when Japan, relative to China, was far more powerful than it is today. So they know they can't fight China. So all of these countries, they want, exactly as you said, the United States to do the fighting for them. What they haven't yet all grasped is that the United States cannot do it either. If you look and research the realities of the American military, it has many of the same problems that the militaries of Europe, Israel, and Japan also do. It's bigger, it's more powerful, but it's not the force it was.
Well, unfortunately, within the Washington, there are hawks. There is a group of people who absolutely hate Russia. They want to have almost like a direct war with Russia. And then there's certainly a group of people want to fight Iranians. And there's a lot of them hate China. And then some of them probably overlapping. So the hawks within the United States don't quite understand that the United States cannot do these fights, right? They're constantly working on get United States into war here and there. You see, that's the dangerous part, isn't it?
It's absolutely correct. Now, this is again something which may astonish people in China, but I and my friend Brian Belletic, we spent hours every week wading through all of the awful material that all these think tanks produce in the United States and all the foreign policy magazines, foreign policy, foreign affairs, the national interest. And what you discover is that these people who advocate for wars all the time have absolutely no idea what the true level of US capabilities actually is. They assume it is infinite. They assume that the United States is so powerful, it can do anything. It never occurs to them that that is not the case any longer. They never talk about it. They never talk about all of the things that a country that is really thinking about war needs to think about. The size and quality of its armed forces, the level of training of the troops, the level of their morale, the number of tanks, the number of armored vehicles, the number of shells, the industrial capacity that lies behind all of that. They never discuss or debate any of that any more than they discuss wider or deeper strategies. It's extraordinary, but it is true.
Well, I just saw an interview. Kim Iverson, she was interviewing a guy named Martin Armstrong. Do you know? I don't know if you heard about him.
Yes,
So
I do. I do know him. He's
yeah, okay. So he's
yeah.
famous for accurately predicting huge events, right? Like the real estate bubble burst in Japan, late 80s, and then 1998, the Soviet problem, economic collapse and stuff like that. So one thing he was saying is that because he had this AI powered computer model to do these kind of predictions, the model called the Socrates. And so he's saying his model is telling him that we are already in World War III, because he said the spillover from the Ukrainian conflict will have spillover, and of course what's going on in Iran and in the Middle East is making it it's no longer a regional thing, but worldwide thing. So that's what his prediction. So let's hope he's wrong, but he was accurate in the past in many events.
Yeah.
So
I've met Martin Armstrong. I've even interviewed him. We once did a program with him on the Duran, and he's very he is a very, very clever man indeed. But he gets a lot of things right, and I'm afraid he also gets quite a few things wrong.
Wrong, yeah.
And I think again, what you tend to find is that he reflects many of the pathologies that Americans have which is that they always see everything in terms of conflict and war. Do you remember what I've told you about this? That Westerners always see things in terms of power.
Yeah.
Chinese people don't. And he absolutely does. So it's absolutely the case that the United States is going to suffer a massive humiliation and setback in the conflict in Ukraine. That there is no doubt. But it doesn't mean that because of that, we are in World War III or anything like it.
Okay.
It ultimately depends on how the United States reacts. Americans always convince themselves that if they show weakness, others will take advantage of it because they're always convinced that everybody around the world is out to get them in some way. I mean, it's there's China is aching to come after the United States. That Russia it thinks of nothing else rather than the conquest of Europe and indeed the Arctic and whatever. That Iran is out to obliterate Israel, and it never occurs to them that the people in these countries have no such plans. What they want is to be left alone, to live in peace, so that they can build up their own societies. And if the United States did leave them alone, they would be absolutely happy with that. And the United States would find that it is in peace also. So, I don't buy the world, we are already in World War III type argument. I come across it all the time, by the way.
Well, again, we talked about this before. I just feel like many times not doing something is an option. It seems like the United States and Europeans, they can't just stay back, okay, leave things alone. What's going on there in China between the mainland and Taiwan, that's their business. We don't need to get involved. And, let people in different parts of the world, if there is conflict, let them sort through it themselves. But they don't seem
No.
like taking that as an option, like a stay away is not an option
No.
for them. They always
Well,
have to do
absolutely.
something, right?
Well, absolutely, because you're completely correct. But can I? You're. By the way, just to reiterate again, you are completely correct. In non-action, a positive decision not to act is an entirely legitimate and, in most cases, by the way, the correct option. Now, however, isn't that something which culture-wise China is far better able to understand than the West is? I mean, I put that to you because you put that to me as a Chinese person, but isn't that very consistent again with China's culture, of which, of course, you're a representative, that the Chinese have always understood this.
Yeah.
It's fundamental to their philosophy, to their statecraft. That you don't have to be running around all the time trying to do things and fix things everywhere, and that's a waste of energy and a waste of time, and on the contrary, it makes things worse. In the West, we are not like this. We feel that we have to be involved and active all the time, because if we don't, we assume that somebody else will be, because that's the history of Europe. And unless somebody does something, someone else will do something against you, which will be negative in its consequences for you. So we have a different cultural DNA, and one can't emphasize this, unfortunately, too much. Europe's DNA, when it's superimposed on the whole world, is a DNA that is almost calculated to generate conflicts rather than to solve them.
Yeah, I mean, throughout the Chinese history, there is always evaluation about a certain emperor, and not doing something is not regarded as this emperor is useless or weak. Not doing something is regarded as some kind of a virtue. That means, during this emperor's time, it's peaceful. There's not a whole lot of conflicts and stuff like that. Whereas like you said, I told you, right, Obama always, I mean, he admires the fact that Lincoln is a war president. So
Yes,
it's almost like he has to be a war president to prove for something. I mean,
exactly.
why?
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about this election in New York, the mayoral
Mhm.
election, which is a primary, right, within the
Yeah.
Democratic Party. So they got this guy, Satran Mamdani, who apparently shocked everybody because in the beginning his polling number was in the single digit, but up until I think the moment for the election, his poll was still behind Andrew Cuomo, but then he upset him. What's your take on this whole thing? That he is clearly he supports the Palestinian, or he has been highly critical of what Israel was doing. And
Mhm.
then during this debate, I'm sure you saw that they even asked a question. Though I mean, why would they ask a New York mayor race that which country you're going to visit first? And he's the one who's saying, "I'm staying in New York," right? But with all that, he still won. Some people are
Yeah.
saying, okay, he will be upset too much the APAC or what have you, but he won in the end, surprisingly. So, what is your take on that?
Well, first of all, I ought to say that he came across as, to me, as a very accomplished political political figure. He
Mhm.
also seemed to me to be saying some quite different and unusual things. I mean, he talks about being a socialist and all of that,
Mhm.
and came up with ideas which did seem to be intended to address some of the many problems that people in New York have with their everyday lives. He didn't seem to me to be especially radical
Mhm.
or out to change the entire political system or transform or revolutionize the United States. But instead of reacting calmly to this development, the American political system has a nervous breakdown. And that tells you how incredibly fragile this system has become, how it senses that it is losing the confidence of the American people, that somebody who comes from outside it and who comes across as level-headed and
Mhm.
sane, nonetheless must be crushed and beaten and smeared and discredited and pushed out into the margins and absolutely must not become mayor of New York. So you trot out McCarthyite legislation from the 1950s to try to exclude him. Apparently, that's actually being suggested. I mean,
Yeah.
crazy things. As I say, it shows the extent to which the American political class has now become an oligarchy that doesn't like people from outside with interesting ideas. I'm not saying he'd be a good mayor. I don't think he's going to be a bad mayor. I don't know anything about him. I'd never heard of him until a week ago.
Yeah.
But I mean, instead of respecting the political process and making coherent arguments against him in the course of that process, you see every part of the political system, the Democrat establishment, the Republican establishment, most of the media, they're all closing ranks to try to push this man down because he is breaking in to the monopoly on political action that this deeply discredited, unpopular, corrupt, oligarchical political class now has. It reminded me very, very much of the response in Britain to the emergence of Jeremy Corbyn back in
Mhm.
2015 when he appeared as leader of the Labour Party.
You see, one thing that I mean, I shouldn't be surprised now. Andrew Cuomo, right? That he had the big names like Bill Clinton and Michael Bloomberg. They all embrace him or backing him, endorse him. He resigned as a governor of New York in
Yeah.
disgrace, right? He had multiple scandals, and yet the establishment are totally fine to be behind him.
Yeah.
So, can we say now in today's political environment in the United States, scandal doesn't matter anymore,
No,
right?
no, because he's one of them. I mean, the fact is the fact that he overreached a little. Ultimately, he's he's part of the same oligarchical group as all of the others are. So, him being mayor of New York is his by right almost. I mean, of course they don't object to the fact that, he's had scandals and corruption and any of all of that kind of thing, because as I said, that doesn't matter in the end. It's that he belongs to the in group that wields power in America or in its own interests ultimately, rather than those of the American people. I'm going to say something, and this is something which, again, um, perhaps needs to be explained, because the Greece that I was born into in the 1960s was profoundly corrupt and continued to be profoundly corrupt for most of my lifetime, and continues to be corrupt in places to this day. And one of the things I can say, and I can say this for absolute personal knowledge, is that in a system which is corrupt and where corruption has become the organizing principle, you do not, people don't like you if you are honest. You have to be corrupt like the rest of them to be accepted by them. One of the reasons I chose not to live in Greece and rejected all attempts to persuade me, of which there were many, to become to involve myself in Greek politics, was precisely for that reason. I mean, people came and they told me, look, it's fine, and not only that, you get paid this amount of money, and we'll also give you envelopes with cash inside it. And I said, I don't want envelopes. I don't want to have it. I don't want to be paid in that way. And of course, that immediately made people suspicious of you. So the fact that Andrew Cuomo has that background from the perspective of the political class is an advantage. It is not a problem.
By the way, how do you feel about the nepotism, right? Andrew Cuomo, part of the reason he's coming from a political family, his father, I think he was a governor of New York also. So nepotism is very very common in the United States, but also it's actually kind of common in China. So you see, in China, there's two ways of getting to the top, two route, you can say. There's princelings, and then there's a youth league. So Xi Jinping is a princelings. His father was a part of the first generation leaders. And he's a good president, I would say. I think most of the Chinese people would agree that he has done a tremendous job. And then the other route is you can say the route for the commoners, the youth league, that you're active early on, join the youth league. Youth league start at the elementary school. You can start, at elementary school is the red scarf. And then the middle school, you can get to youth league. And then most actively is in different colleges. So the previous president, like Hu Jintao and then Jiang Zemin, they were all pretty active in their universities' youth league organizations, and then they got promoted from there. So you see that's the two routes. And in China, people actually don't have too much problem with nepotism itself, although, it's still controversial from time to time. Now we know George W. Bush is definitely a nepo, that's how he got there. I'm just curious, and he has been an awful president. I think he's lousy. Yeah. So I'm just curious, how do you feel? You coming from a political family too, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, in Greece again, I mean, nepotism is an absolutely essential part of society. If I decided to go into Greek politics, I mean, automatically I would have become a member of the Greek Parliament. I mean, that is a given. I would almost certainly have become a senior minister in the Greek government. Again, that is a given. Even if I'd been a complete fool, I mean, because that's the nature of the system. I mean, Greek politics revolves around nepotism. So our current prime minister, Mr. Mitsotakis, comes from an important political dynasty based in the island of Crete. His father was prime minister. His main rival in the party, a man called Mr. Karamanlis, his father was prime minister. As I said, you find this. It's almost impossible in Greece to succeed in politics unless you belong to this network of families, of which, as I said, mine is one, which control Greek politics and have done so since the late 19th century. I think China is profoundly different. I think the American system is starting to bear some resemblance to the Greek system, by the way. But I think China is profoundly different. I mean, I think that in China, first of all, there is a very different sense of family, in the sense that within the Chinese family system, there is a sense of obligations, from father to son and son to father. I think in China, yes, we call them princelings. I think that's a Western term, actually. I don't know whether it's a Chinese term, but the point is that there were the original veterans who created the Communist Party of China and the People's Liberation Army, who made the revolution, and their children feel a filial duty, if you like, to move that process forward. That's why, actually, my own impression is that some of the best people in China come from that background, not just Xi Jinping, incidentally. And they are not there as a group within the political system to shut out outsiders. It's rather that they have a sense of a sort of obligation to move the process, to move China forward, because that was what their father and grandfather, or because some of them, their mothers too, because the Communist Party did actually have lots of women activists, and so did the People's Liberation Army, by the way, just to say. But they have that sense of that this is the tradition, this is what we must do. We have a duty to move it forward. So it's if you like, it's the difference between a duty and a right in Greece. It's in Greece, and I think increasingly the United States, it is your right, if you belong to a certain political family, to take your place in the political system. In China, it's your obligation to do that in order to move the process forward in a certain way. And as you rightly said, the system is much more open. In Greece, it isn't open at all, by the way. In the United States, it soon won't be either.
Yeah, and then if I, when I think about it, Xi Jinping get to where he is not just because he's the son of the prince. He still has to prove himself. He has to start, in the village, somewhere. Yeah.
I mean, again, there is a major cultural difference, and again, I think this has deep roots in Chinese society and Chinese culture. And as I said about the obligations that, as I said, families have and fathers have to sons and sons to fathers, which have no analogy in the West. So one should not. I don't think one should compare what are really very different things to each other, simply because, as I said, it's the case that the son of X rises up. I mean, the mechanics and the theory behind it, the philosophy behind it, is profoundly different.
Nepotism itself, I think, is not necessarily all wrong, because there are people, my dentist, for example, his father and grandfather, they were all dentists. I'm okay with that, It's just that in the political system, first of all, it's a high stake, right? Once you get to become a powerful person, there's so much at stake. And so that's why people want this process to be fair and not just open to certain people and close to all the rest,
I mean, again, I want to be very careful what I say, and I don't want my words to be misunderstood.
Mhm.
But um, the closest approximation in the West to what we've been talking about in China is the aristocratic concept of noblesse oblige. If you are from a certain social category, if your
Mhm.
father and grandfather were, then you have a moral obligation to not only continue their work but to continue it well. Now,
Mhm.
I can give a very good example of this. In Britain, in the legal system, in the court system, which I used to work in for a very, very long time,
Mhm.
it's fair to say that around half the judges are people who come from legal dynasties,
Mhm.
which have often stretched back very, very far to the 17th century in many cases. And they are often the best judges.
Okay. Mhm.
Mm. For that very same reason.
Mhm.
But the point is that they are not doing that out of a sense of, privilege.
Mhm.
They're doing that out of a sense of duty.
Mhm.
If you've lived with this,
Mhm.
you will understand that instantly. You will
Mhm.
understand it differently. In Greece, which is a very profoundly corrupt society, and I'm afraid increasingly in the United States, it's quite different. What you have is a predatory class of
Mhm.
people who have acquired control and who are making sure that the benefits of the system are monopolized by them and
Mhm.
who then pass on those benefits to their children. So there is a difference, and it's one that a cultural historian could perhaps explain better than I can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the whole expectation is different, right? That,
Absolutely.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
Xi Jinping hates corruption.
yes,
That
absolutely.
that 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 is already tells you that he
Mhm.
doesn't fulfill the Andrew Cuomo type some system. Like, that he's completely different to that.
Mhm. Yeah. Hmm.
One political movement that made a major effort not to tolerate nepotism within itself was the Soviet Communist Party. So
Okay.
if you look at it, you will
Hmm.
see that none of the important people in the
Hmm.
Soviet Communist Party were the sons or daughters of
Hmm.
previously important people. You
Hmm.
never see that. And I know that there is a view that actually, in the end, that weakened it
Okay.
because it lost that cadre of people who might have been there,
Hmm.
who had a sense of duty,
Yeah.
felt a sense of deep duty and deep feeling that they had to work to preserve it. So I just wanted to make that point because of
Yeah.
we've yeah.
Yeah, people like Xi Jinping, he has vetted interest to make the country a better
Yes,
because his
yes,
father, dedicated whole
yes,
life, right? And some
exactly,
people lost their father or grandfather to this fight. So it's
exactly,
their vetted interest to
yes,
see China
exactly,
become stronger, right?
exactly,
Better. Yeah. So,
exactly. Was it appeared admirable, but it might ultimately have, loosened its discipline in the end.
mhm.
The
So
party's discipline.
it's good to
Yeah,
have both, I think.
well, it's good. Well, it is absolutely.
Yeah.
Always bear in mind
Mhm.
that people with the kind of background that Xi Jinping has are in an organization like the Communist Party of China always going to be a very small minority,
Uh-huh.
but they are always there,
Mhm.
and if you like, they work, if you like, as a kind of conscience of the party
Yeah.
within it.
The federal judge rules in, and there's a case, an AI company, Anthropics. So the federal judge rules in the Anthropics' favor in a landmark copyright case,
Yeah,
copyright infringement case, which basically saying Anthropics is fine to use books. So the lawsuit was filed by a group of authors for
yeah,
Anthropics using their works without permission. And so now the basically the judge is saying that's fine. You can do that using other people's work without their consent and to train your AI model. Of course, I mean, we talked about this before that the copyrights is probably on its way to end because I think in Britain they are even either is in the process or considering to change their copyright laws to be
Yes.
adapt to be more favor, to help the AI companies. So now we have a real case, and I mean, probably they are going to appeal. So it's not the finalized yet, but nonetheless, it seems like AI companies are gaining grounds, and we could see the end of all the copyrights now. Is that what it
Yeah,
is?
absolutely. I think so. Absolutely, I think so. Again, a system which China is better adapted to than the West is,
Mhm.
because you see the thing to understand about copyright and patents and all of this is that they are seen in the West as property. So
Mhm.
we've always had great difficulties in the West with compromising on property rights, and it's what Karl Marx said long ago that a system starts to break down when it is no longer able to accommodate technological and scientific and social change.
Mhm.
And here we see just one example.
Yeah, one more thing. Now, going back to Mamdani, so do you think both parties are going to try to stop him because he
Yes,
won primary, right? But
yeah,
now they're both parties going to try to stop him to become the mayor, right?
absolutely, absolutely. Whichever party. I mean, if he wins the primary, you will see lots of Democrats working to get the Republican elected,
Yeah.
and that in New York, by the way.
Yeah. And actually the Democrat Party has been, I don't know, they have been crazy. Remember in February this year, David Hogg, who was another young promising guy, who won the vice chairmanship of the DNC, and then they just canceled that election, just saying we don't, they invalidated the result. They just did
I
that.
wouldn't. We're gonna have all of this happen again. Of course, it's going to embitter and anger people. I mean,
Yeah.
again, the reason he has appeared at all is because people in New York are becoming deeply dissatisfied and angry with the political system that
Yeah.
is not delivering for them. So
Mhm.
they hear this man. He says attractive things. He does not come across to me as a radical revolutionary. He's not there to overthrow the Constitution or do any of these things.
Mhm.
He wants to sort out systems for groceries,
Yeah.
which I can imagine people why they would be interested in all of that. But he comes from outside the system. He has, in his case, left wing socialist ideas. Um, so they're going to do everything they possibly can to push him out.
Yeah. Now, actually, one thing I noticed that there were some commentators saying this whole relatively new ranking system helped him too. So in the past, that you pick the guy and then the rest of, you just leave everybody else kind of a blank. But now you rank them. So who is my first choice, my second choice? And then when they tally it, so if you say, okay, if let's say there's five candidates, okay, A, B, C, D, E. All right. So I like candidate E, even though the most popular, the likely people who get elected probably A and B, but I like E. So I vote E as number one, but I can rank like B as two or something. Now, in the past, if you pick E, you kind of like almost wasted your votes, right? Because the E
Yeah,
is not going to, it's not going to happen. But today, when you rank it, you can rank E as your number one choice, but you rank B as your number two choice. So let's say if E, the first round calculation was the last, then E got taken out. So E
yeah,
is no longer on the running. But B, since you choose B is your number two choice, your vote will go to B. So that's my
yeah,
understanding of this ranking
yes,
system. Now, some people are saying this is a better system because it's better reflect the people's true will. Because in the past,
mm,
I don't like any of them, but I can't, I don't want to waste my vote.
mm.
So I have to pick between the two. But now you can actually do choose the people
Interesting,
based on your preferences. Now, some people are
interesting.
saying that system helped him. Do you think that's could be an improvement for our,
Well,
electoral
it
system?
might be, it might be, and it could be why he one of the reasons why he won. I mean, because it does seem to have been unexpected. So I can see that. I can absolutely see that. What I think it would have done is that it would have helped him to break through, because it's clear that now that he's got to the position that he has, he's actually attracting not just preference votes, but positive votes. People are saying, well, look, he can actually win now. So I like what he's saying, so I'm going to support him. This very much happened with Corbyn in Britain, by the way, when he began to win primaries to become leader of the Labour Party. And people were giving him support, not because they really expected him to win initially, but because he was known to be a nice man and people liked his views. And for that reason, he was getting second votes. And then suddenly he broke through. And the moment he did that, you saw this huge surge of support for him come from the grassroots of the party, which propelled him to the leadership of the party. And then it became clear in 2017 that a lot of that huge surge of support was reflected in attitudes across the country as a whole.
We will see. Let's watch. Let's see in November if he wins. Okay.
Yeah, indeed.
All right.
Indeed.
Okay. Let's talk next time. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sophia. Speak next week.
Bye.
Bye.